thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. We have an amazing guest for you today, Dan Harris of 10% Happier and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. Dan was basically primed for just a conventionally very successful career in journalism and perhaps nothing else. In 2000, he joined ABC News and was kind of primed to make it to the top there. In 2014, he actually had a panic attack on air, and this was kind of an inflection point for him. And he essentially did what all of us would do, which is kind of investigate the sources of his panic attack and what kind of were the causes of it. And he used his kind of journalism platform as leverage to meet a lot of the best kind of in the self-help industry. And he documented that in 10% Happier. And what's really amazing about that book is, as opposed to a lot of other kind of self-help books, it's not immediately kind of embracing of everything that's kind of new agey and self-helpy. He comes in as kind of like, as he calls himself, a hard-charging skeptic, and he kind of sifts the substance from the snake oil. And it's written not in a proselytizing or kind of pedantic way. It's written in a way that you can really identify with. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And then he follows up with Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics, which is kind of, if 10% Happier gets you bought into meditating to begin with, this book is kind of the how-to. If you have a lot of objections and maybe aren't fully bought in that it is helpful, or then you are bought in and you do think it's helpful, but you're having a hard time kind of just doing it every day, this book is kind of going to help you there. So I recommend both. He has a podcast as well, 10% Happier podcast. He has an app, and he's still doing all of the amazing kind of journalistic things as well, on GMA and other platforms. So, thank you so much, Dan, for coming here. Really appreciate it.
I love from an anthropological standpoint that nobody sits like right, except for this brave individual. It's like there's some sort of force field.
Maybe they're afraid of meditation.
Or just me.
So I want to kind of set some context here and just talk about your life pre-meditation and your outlook on life. I think your dad actually had an interesting phrase that I'm blanking on, that kind of represented your take on life. And just being a very ambitious person trying to make it to the top. So there's something about insecurity, and then post meditation, just so we can kind of get people bought into your transformation.
So my dad is a academic physician or recently retired academic physician in Boston, and both my parents are academic physicians, like really sort of hard-charging secular folks in Boston. And my dad had an expression, which is the price of security is insecurity, which is a great thing to tell your child. Always shocks people when I tell them that my father is Jewish. And so it was this kind of idea that the only way to succeed is to work incredibly hard, and it takes a lot of gnashing of teeth and rending of garments, and so I really that became my way of surviving when I arrived at ABC News in the year 2000, and I was 28 and really young and insecure about my lack of experience, and I had operated on this thesis for a long time, but it really went into overdrive when I came here to New York 18 years ago, and even now that I'm oddly enough sort of a traveling evangelist for meditation, which was never like in my plan at all. Even now that I still actually believe the price of security is insecurity. I still think if you're going to do anything great, it takes a lot of work and stress and plotting and planning, and I do a lot of that. I'm still, even though I really believe in the benefits of meditation, I'm still as ambitious as I ever was. Not only I have my situation at ABC where I host Nightline and the weekend edition of Good Morning America, but I have a startup company and I think 5 books kind of planned in my head that I want to do, and have a podcast, and I go around giving speeches and stuff like that. So I'm still really ambitious in some of the same ways that I was as a younger guy, but I think I'm just less of an asshole about it. I mean, that is really, people ask me all the time, how do I know if meditation is working? And the simple metric is, are you less of an asshole? To yourself and others. And that's the key, because we often, the number one victim of our worst impulses is ourselves. And so I think that where meditation helps is that I've learned how to draw the line between what I call useless rumination and what I call constructive anguish. Like, there's a certain amount of plotting and planning that makes sense, and hard work and stress and banging your head up against the wall, and then it stops making sense. And really having increased self-awareness, which is really one of the big fruits of meditation, can help you see, all right, am I, at this point, is this angst useful? And learning how to manage that has made me much more effective in my job, and also easier to live with, just living with myself, but also, I've heard my wife talk about this many times, just generally being less of a shithead.
Fair. I want to go through the kind of the plot line of 10% Happier just a little bit,
sure.
so that I think it basically it shows through your life how meditation is very, very effective, and that you tried a bunch of different things and kind of looked at everything. So you had this panic attack on air. You kind of sought help, and you realized it was kind of a mild form of kind of depression and anxiety. And describe from there, you use your kind of platform as leverage to meet kind of, your Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle and people like that. Describe those experiences, and then what brought you to, realizing, what, just plain and simple, mindfulness meditation is the most scientifically studied thing. This works.
So I wouldn't recommend you do it my way, because it involved doing a lot of stupid things. There are plenty of seats over here, guys. I'm trying to see if I can challenge people to sit directly in front of me, so I can give you a death stare the whole time. Hi. Hey, how are you? Good. I like this guy. So I really don't recommend you do it the way I did. So I had a panic attack on national television in 2004. Unpleasant. And really embarrassing. And I was filling in as the news reader on Good Morning America. They don't have that position anymore, but there used to be somebody who would come on at the top of each hour and read the headlines. And I had filled in on this job before, and I didn't have any reason to foresee what was about to happen, which was that I just basically freaked out. And because I have a pretty good poker face, and I'd spent my entire adult life on television, it didn't look like I didn't like rip the mic off and run away. I just had trouble breathing, and I was stammering a lot. Although actually you can see it on a company I believe you own called YouTube. If you Google or search on YouTube for panic attack on live television, it's the #1 result. And after I had the panic attack, I went to a doctor here in New York City, and he asked me a bunch of questions, and one of the questions was, do you do drugs? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said nothing, except for he gave me a look that communicated the following sentiment. Okay, asshole, mystery solved. And so the backstory is that I had spent a lot of time as a really ambitious young reporter so I got to ABC in the year 2000, then 9/11 happened the next year, and I was in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, Iraq, a lot in Iraq, and that I came home after a big spell in Iraq, and I got depressed, and I didn't know I was depressed, and I did something very dumb, which is I started self-medicating with a lot of cocaine. And turns out that's a good way to have a panic attack. So when that doctor said what he said, or gave me the look that said what it said, I quit doing drugs and agreed to go see him once or twice a week. And that kind of, it's not like I found meditation that day. I didn't actually, and so it's not like then everything was all like unicorns barfing rainbows immediately or ever. It took me a couple of years to stumble onto meditation, and at first I was really skeptical. I mean, I just thought it was complete bullshit, and I associated it with, hacky sack and dream catchers and yoga and stuff like that. I had a bad experience in yoga as a little. My parents were hippies, and they made me go to yoga class, and the teacher made me do it in my underwear. So I was pretty anti-yoga. So I had all of those associations in my head, but then I saw the science that suggests that meditation is really good for you. I don't want to. The science sometimes is, I think, inappropriately hyped, but I think what we can say is that it strongly suggests that short daily doses of meditation can confer a lot of health benefits, including, basically, rewiring your brain. It changes key areas of the brain that have to do with attention regulation, stress, self-awareness, compassion, and, that sounds cooler than it is on some levels because everything you do rewires your brain. The brain is the organ of experience. So every experience you have is creating new neural pathways. But this is just an organized way to train the brain and the mind. And to me, that's the revolutionary insight, which is that the mind is trainable. We think that we are the way that we are. These are like factory settings that can't be rejiggered. That we are as compassionate as we'll ever be. We're as calm, generous, focused, whatever. But all of these mental attributes, which are what we want the most, we may think we want whatever. In my case, success, all the hedonistic pleasures that are on offer. But all that stuff is refracted through one filter, which is your mind. And that filter is trainable. And that is really what got me interested in meditation. And in the process of getting to that kind of secular scientific view of meditation, I did, as Jesse indicated, I did use my job at ABC News to meet a lot of these self-help gurus, which turned out to be I don't want to say useless digression, because it was useful in that it provided me a lot of people to make fun of in my book. But I didn't learn that many, I learned some things that are very useful, but I also met a lot of people who tell you that you can solve all of your problems through the power of positive thinking, which is utter nonsense, and I think actually a really destructive thing to tell people. Eckhart Tolle, I think, actually is interesting in some ways. I don't know if you guys know who he is. So Eckhart Tolle is a really big self-help guru, and he changed my life, I have to say. I don't know if he did it on purpose, but I was reading one of his books, and it was the first time anybody had ever pointed out to me that we have a voice in our heads, that we have this inner narrator that chases you out of bed and is yammering at you all day long and has you constantly wanting stuff or not wanting stuff, judging people, comparing yourself to people. My friend Sam Harris, we're not related, but we're good friends. He says that when he thinks about the voice in his head, he feels like he's been hijacked by the most boring person alive who just says the same shit over and over. Most of it negative, all of it self-referential. And Tolle was really the first person I had ever heard who was pointing out that when you're unaware of this nonstop conversation that you're having with yourself, it owns you. And all the dumbest shit we do is because we're being yanked around by this malevolent puppeteer, our ego. And that's why you eat when you're not hungry, or you check your email in the middle of a conversation. And for me, that reading Eckhart Tolle really, well, first of all, it became obvious to me that my panic attack was the result of the ego. That I had gone off to war zones without thinking about the consequences, came home, got depressed, was insufficiently self-aware to know that I was depressed, and then did this very dumb thing of self-medicating. And so reading Eckhart Tolle is really powerful, but my beef with him, I did go meet him afterwards, and my beef with him is that, as a friend of mine has described him, he is correct, but not useful. So he diagnoses the problem beautifully, brilliantly. Although, by the way, for thousands of years, people have been diagnosing this problem. He just happened to be the first dude I ever heard say it. But there was a guy named the Buddha, you might have heard of, who also talked about this stuff. But totally, he does diagnose this and write about it really, and I think in an incisive way. But I don't feel like he gives you an actionable, practical advice to deal with it. And it was, so I give him a lot of credit for really changing my life, but I also then had to go find something specific to do about it, which was meditation. That was a really long answer to your simple question.
It was a great answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. With Eckhart Tolle, I think the beginning of Power now, actually, like, it's like he's in a dark room, everything's negative, and then he wakes up the next morning and everything's fine.
And then he lives on a park bench for 2 years in a state of bliss in the city of London.
That's right. Exactly.
Where they have winter.
Right. So if you know, can you replicate that? I don't like maybe.
Good luck.
Yeah. I really like something you say in your new book, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. Again, this is kind of the follow-up to help you actually meditate once you're kind of more bought in, at least. You say that human beings are not, the original word is, it's not just Homo sapiens, it's not just thinking beings, it's Homo sapiens sapiens. It's this self-referential awareness that we can kind of think. And that kind of cuts to the core of maybe your definition of mindfulness. So can we just kind of establish that context? What is your definition of mindfulness?
Mindfulness is this, it's an interesting thing because simultaneously a really boring sounding word, very anodyne sounding word, but also the recipient of an incalculable amount of hype. So everything's like mindful yarn bombing, mindful this, mindful that. And I often think that people who, when they talk about mindfulness, really have no idea what they're talking about. So I think the simple definition is, but we should say mindfulness is actually an ancient term. The Buddha talked about it a lot. It was really one of his big talking points, and it has a lot of meanings. But I think a really easy way to think about it as a beginner is it's just the ability to know what's happening in your mind at any given moment without getting carried away by it. It's the skill of being able to see what's happening between your ears without necessarily taking the bait and acting on it. And this is really, in my view, the big benefit of meditation. There are lots of benefits, we can talk about them, but in my experience, the big benefit is to be able to have a term that's been used to describe this is emotional intelligence. So we are just bombarded with external stimuli, internal stimuli in response to external stimuli. These very powerful emotions like anger, boredom, sadness, and often we're just owned by these things. We're just basically just bobbing around in a sea of our own emotions without any real awareness of what's happening. And meditation just builds you an inner microscope, an inner telescope to see. Is that super contradictory? Telescope and microscope? Whatever. It's a way to see what's happening. Thank you. It's a way to see what's happening inside so that it doesn't own you. And it's not complicated. Basically, you sit, watch your breath. Usually we start with the breath. You sit, you feel your breath coming in, going out, and then you're just going to get hit by all of these distractions. And you notice, oh, I've become distracted. And in that moment, when most of us think we're failures, that is the win. Because when you see how fucking crazy you are, the craziness doesn't own you as much. And that is the game. The game is to sit and watch the zoo and to see it is a zoo. And that seeing clearly of the zoo makes you less of an animal. And that is what we're doing in meditation, and that is mindfulness.
So you touched on this.
You're gonna have to like edit the hell out of this video. It's like the YouTube censors are not gonna be cool with it. Sorry. When I'm not on television, I break FCC violations.
You're so used to upholding them. There are a bunch of misconceptions about meditation. This idea that you have to be this Buddha-like character, under a waterfall, that you have to do it in a fixed time, that you have to do it right, and there's some kind of perfect state that you have to attain, or that you have to crowd out your thoughts, versus what you just said, which is disidentify with your thoughts. So, can you touch on a lot of the big ones?
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I think I'll start at, I think there are the two biggest ones. We've already touched on a little bit, the first one, but I think it's actually worth discussing again, which people say to me all the time, okay, Dan, I get it. I see the science, meditation. I should be meditating, but you don't understand. I can't do it because my mind is too busy. And I call this the fallacy of uniqueness. The good news and the bad news is you're not special. Everybody's mind is like this. We evolved, as I think Bill Duane, one of your former colleagues, who was until recently the superintendent of well-being here at Google, and a great guy, he has said we descended from nervous monkeys. You know, we evolved on the savannah for threat detection and for finding sources of pleasure, you know, food, sexual partners. Evolution bequeathed us a racing mind, which made a lot of sense, and still in some cases makes a lot of sense. But this is the way all of our minds work, and that doesn't mean you can't meditate, because it is a massive and pernicious misconception that meditation involves clearing your mind. I often joke that if you sit and you clear your mind, you're either enlightened or you're dead. More likely the latter. The point is not to clear your mind. The point is to focus your mind for a few nanoseconds at a time. And then when you get distracted, which you will, you just start again and again and again and again. And it is that seeing of the distraction, knowing you become distracted, and starting again, that is the win. I often refer to it as the bicep curl for your brain. This is what you see on the brain scans of meditators. This is the mechanism for changing the brain, for rewiring key regions of the brain. So what are you focusing on? As I said before, you're focusing on the breath. There are basically 3 steps for beginning meditation. The first is you sit in a reasonably quiet place. If it's not as pristine as you would like, put in headphones. I sometimes, if I'm in a really noisy place, I'll put in headphones and then play a little white noise through it. So you sit in a reasonably quiet place, close your eyes. If you don't want to close your eyes, you can kind of just gaze at the floor in a neutral way. The second step is just to bring your full attention to the feeling of your breath coming in and going out. By the way, there are other objects of meditation, other things you can meditate on aside from the breath, but the breath is a great place to start because it's super portable. So you're just feeling the raw data of the physical sensations of your breath coming in and going out, like your belly rising and falling, or the cool air passing your nostrils. And then the third step is you will be ambushed by all of these random thoughts. You know, where do gerbils run wild, blah, blah, blah. And then the whole game is just to notice, oh, I'm distracted right now, back to the breath. Over and over and over. And that is really, that is the game. And I think when it's explained that way, I can see the light going on for people that this thing they've told themselves is impossible is actually super possible for anybody, no matter how distractible you are. I'm not some paragon of focus. I went to work in TV specifically because you don't have to, I didn't have what it took to like be a coder or a lawyer or something like that. And so if it can work for me, I think it can work for anybody. The other big misconception, and this is I think probably a bigger problem for people who are already bought in, they know they want to meditate. The big issue that people have is finding the time to do it. So I like to say on this one, I have good news and I have even better news. The good news is, like, I think 5 to 10 minutes is a great habit. If you were doing that every day, I think everybody wants to know what's the least you can do and still get the benefits. And so I've asked a lot of these neuroscientists, what is the least you can do? Because I hear this from people all the time. And so I said, is 5 to 10 minutes a day enough? And we don't know for sure. But the consensus that I'm hearing from folks is 5 to 10 minutes is probably enough. And like, just see for yourself. I've had this standing challenge for the last 4 years since my first book came out, which is, I say publicly all the time, try meditating 5 to 10 minutes a day, every day for a month. And if you think it's complete bullshit, send me a note on Twitter and tell me I'm a moron. And people hit me on Twitter all the time to tell me I'm a moron, but never for that. Never, not once. So I really do think this is, you know, the only way you're going to know whether you're getting the benefits is how it shows up in your own life. You know, the science is really useful for me as an evangelizing tool. But you may start meditating because you hear about the science, but you don't keep meditating because you think your prefrontal cortices are changing. You keep meditating because, as I said before, you're less of an asshole to yourself or others. And that's really just the way to see whether it's working. So the good news is I think 5 to 10 minutes a day is enough. I think the better news is that I really do believe that if that's too much for you, 1 minute most days is enough. We have, at the 10% Happier Company, we talk about this 1 minute daily-ish. And I think that is a great way for people who just don't feel, you know, I get it, I'm busy too, so I get the feeling of one more thing on my to-do list is just gonna make me more stressed out than I already am, and that defeats the whole purpose of this thing. So 1 minute most days is, I think, a really good way to get started.
And meditation for Fidgety Skeptics, you start actually at home with GMA, getting the whole cast to meditate and listening to their objections, and then you kind of go west across the country. You just mentioned some kind of conventional objections. Were there any like kind of weird or very surprising objections you got to people wanting to meditate, or for you, you know, telling them they should meditate?
You know, the objection that we got that I had that I just couldn't relate to because I'm so selfish is the idea that meditation is self-indulgent. So my wife has this objection. She's a physician, she's a mom, and she is really naturally very compassionate and sort of other-oriented. But it turns out to be a very common thing that I heard a lot when we went out on the road. We took this big orange bus across the country to meet people who want to meditate but aren't doing it, to try to figure out what are the main obstacles and how can we tackle them. That was kind of the narrative conceit of the second book. And one of the obstacles we found was that this idea that meditation is self-indulgent. And that's actually, there's a really easy knockdown on this, which is if you want to help other people, it's really hard to do that if you're a mess. And you know, it's the cliche from the airline safety instructions, put your own oxygen mask on first. If you truly want to be of service, the way to do it from a maximally resilient, calm, useful standpoint is to, you know, have your shit together.
Given what you just said, and given that, you know, there's an emphasis of training from the neck down, kind of, you know, just in the form of like physical education growing up, like why is this not instituted on a much kind of younger level for kids? I know, like, maybe did David Lynch do some stuff?
He has done some stuff, yes.
But it doesn't seem still accepted on that level. Like, it should be this foundational thing that everybody kind of learns. But yeah,
I think we're heading there. I do. That's my optimistic view.
Okay.
But we're starting to see it. It's, you know, now it's in sort of some schools and pretends to be more progressive schools, or some school district where they're lucky because there's just an activist locally who's an activist parent who's pushing into the schools. But I actually think we're gonna, again, this is me being optimistic, but I think we're headed toward a world where mental skills are taught in schools across the country and in basic training for the military, and that's already starting to happen because the military is embracing this stuff. And in locker rooms, again, that is starting to happen. Chicago Cubs called me not long ago to come maybe talk to their folks. They're into it. You know, the fact that Google has several courses on offer that teach it. I think we're at the beginning of a public health revolution, and these things often take time. And what started it, what catalyzed it, is really the science, because it's the lingua franca in our culture. And you know, people like me see the science, the blobs on the brain scans, and think, all right, yeah, I'm in. And I think that happens, you know, in C-suites at companies like this, and superintendents' offices for schools around the country. And so I think we're heading toward it. It may take a little while, and especially in schools, you do occasionally have parents who don't like it because they think it's religious, especially evangelical parents. And I get that, because they are correct. These practices are derived from Eastern spiritual practices, but the kind of stuff that's being taught in schools is secularized. Algebra was developed by the Muslims, and we're not worried about that. And so I think these are innate mental skills that that are our birthright, and it happens to be that the Buddhists and the Hindus before them describe these skills really well, but that doesn't mean they're Buddhist.
Right. And what is the science? Because you mentioned at the top that some of it is a little overhyped. Anything you do is going to affect your brain. The one thing that I always hear is it affects or decreases the gray matter in your brain associated with stress and anxiety. What else is out there?
It's been shown to lower the release of stress hormones. It's shown to lower blood pressure, boost your immune system. It's been shown to help. I think where the research is really the strongest is anxiety and depression, both of which I've dealt with my whole life. And then the brain, the neuroscience really shows that it can grow the gray matter in the area of the brain associated with self-awareness and with compassion, and it decreases the gray matter in the area associated with stress. It's also been shown to kind of fluff up the area associated with attention regulation, which is a huge problem. I love joking that the people who are developing the products and services, I don't want to name any names, but Google comes to mind. They're destroying our abilities to focus, are now embracing these ancient technologies that are improving. There's a reason why folks at Google are embracing this stuff, because it's been shown to help with attention regulation. And we are in an age where our attention's under siege. Is not to unfairly malign Google. There are many people in this space. So, I think there are a lot of things that, from the scientific standpoint, that make this practice really attractive. But again, I would advise that it's not super useful to get really hung up on everything the science says, because once you try it for yourself, you're not really going to have that many questions about the science, because it's just about, you start to see the benefits on your own. And what we know about habit formation is the best way to create a habit, which is a very hard thing to do. Creating a habit. The best way to do it is to be pulled forward by the benefits, to make it either a pleasurable experience, or, like for me, exercise is not pleasurable, but I like not being overweight, and I like that it makes me less depressed, and so that really helps me stay on it. And I think with meditation, you start to see the benefits, like you're less yanked around by your emotions, you're more focused, and that really provides a powerful incentive to keep doing it.
I know an objection you had early on was the fear of losing your edge. A lot of people think maybe to be creative you need a certain amount of pain, like there's the kind of the tortured artist kind of archetype. What do you say to that?
Who says if Van Gogh wasn't so messed up that he didn't chop off his ear, that maybe his art wouldn't have been better?
Right.
I don't know that this has been proven. And by the way, meditation, I wish that it did, but meditation doesn't solve all of your problems. It's not going to take all of the Sturm und Drang in your life and just evaporate it all into an impenetrable bubble of bliss. It doesn't work that way. As one great meditation teacher has said, it makes you more of a connoisseur of your neuroses, but it doesn't vanquish the neuroses. So you're more self-aware. You see, oh yeah, these are the various neurotic programs that are kind of running my life. I have this, when I'm in one mode, I'm really greedy, or when I'm in another mode, I'm really fearful, or in another mode, I'm really self-critical. It just allows you to say, oh, this is the trance I'm operating in right now, and to pop out of it, maybe for a few seconds, or maybe really to pop out of it just for, you don't immediately fall back into it. So I really don't think it's the type of thing, that is going to, defang your ability to be creative, and nor do I think it's going to. As I said before, I'm still really ambitious, and I do a lot of meditation. So I've not found that it's reduced my ambition at all. I do think maybe on the edges, it can clarify what is truly important to you and we're all like kind of rats in a maze, just we're going wherever the food pellets are. We're in these mazes that they set up for rats. They're just chasing the little pellets. And we're looking for various varieties of dopamine hit. And so I've seen over time that the things that I thought made me happy don't make me as happy, but there are other things that really do. And so I think it might change the nature of your ambition, but I don't, if it truly makes you happy to, vanquish your enemies and be, endlessly, mindlessly acquisitive, I think that you will retain those capacities. But I also think you might find that you are not as blindly driven as you used to be, but your ambition gets channeled in more wholesome directions. But that doesn't mean you're moving into a yurt or anything like that.
Right. And so, okay, you do GMA, you do Nightline, you have the podcast, you have the app, which is you guys should check out. It's basically a bunch of awesome meditation experts like Joseph Goldstein, who you mentioned earlier, giving you their own kind of tips and tricks and take on meditation. What's your goal with all of this? Just like moving forward, you have a lot going on.
I've been told by our venture capitalists that I shouldn't say what I'm about to say, but I'm just going to say it anyway because I can't think of a better way to say it. But like my grand ambition, and I say this in the spirit of that old expression, they say a man's reach, or let's just say a person's reach, should exceed his or her grasp. So I say this as aspirational, but I would love if 10% Happier became kind of like the Nike for the mind. That now that we know that the mind is trainable, which is a really radical and empowering thing to know, I would love if we become the company that helps you do it in all areas of your life. So right now we have an app that's doing quite well, and I want that to grow, but I could see us moving into in-person trainings, corporate trainings, secular meditation retreats, lifestyle brand type stuff like shirts and I want to make, don't steal this, I want to make little, really nice sweatshirts, and at that point where the sleeve meets the watch, it should say in just very subtle embroidery, "Don't be an asshole." So every time you look, it's just a great reminder. That's still my little mantra. So things like that, kind of funny, 10% Happier branded stuff. And then books, I want to do lots more books. And I see my podcast as a place, where people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get attention, these great meditation teachers who, really reach their folks in the Buddhist world but don't reach a wider audience, that I can help them reach a wider audience. That's where I think I want it to go, but I also love working in TV news, so I sometimes describe my schedule as drowning in chocolate. I love everything I do, but I'm still drowning.
That's a great problem to have.
Yeah, high-class problem.
And then it seemed like the meditation retreat in 10% Happier profoundly was like a big inflection point for you. At what point do you consider that? If you don't have any experience, can you just do a 10-day retreat?
Totally.
You can?
Yeah. Okay. You can. I don't recommend it, but you can. And the good retreats are created in a way that they're for all levels of experience. Mm-hmm. When I tell people that I went on, for my first book, I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat, I feel that sometimes that is, I know how the skeptical mind works, and I suspect for some of you it's like, oh, that's what this involves? Well, I'm never doing it. I'm never going to meditate because you have to go on a retreat. You don't have to go on a retreat. I stand by my 1 minute or 5-10 minute rule. I was writing a book about meditation, and I need some shit to write about, so I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat. I still, as it turns out, I don't want to say I liked it so much, because that would be the wrong way to describe it. But I found it meaningful, useful, powerful enough that I now have done many of them, and I plan to continue to do them. It's just like, you really taking yourself out of, is that me? Sounds like my voice. Sorry, I'm distracted now. Meditation retreat, by the way, they have shorter ones, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. I actually do kind of recommend going for 7 days or longer, because it sucks so badly at the beginning that, and it takes several days for that to kind of wear off. That the inner rebellion, in my experience, because I hate it so much. Even now when I go, I mean, I hate it so much. I hate everybody there. I hate the teachers. I can't believe I'm here. It takes a while for that kind of inner chatter to start to calm down, and that's when the good stuff's on offer. So yeah, I really do recommend it, but it's not a must.
Okay. It's interesting what you just said about a retreat is almost like meditating is like a microcosm of that. Like it can, almost the harder the beginning is, like the more
That's
kind
right.
of refreshing it ends up kind of being.
But you can't. Here's the here's the catch-22.
You can't go for that.
You can't go for anything in meditation.
Yeah.
And the most valuable thing I have. There's this friend of mine who's written many beautiful books about meditation. His name is Dr. Mark Epstein. He's a shrink here in New York, and he was looking back at his diaries from various retreats he's been on, and every time, the bottom line, the lesson he takes away, he's found it for every retreat he's gone on. He realizes he learns the same thing, which is you can't try to feel. The point of meditation is not to feel a certain way. It is to feel whatever you're feeling, clearly, mindfully, so that your feelings don't own you. And so if you sit and try to feel calm, it's pretty much a guarantee that you won't feel calm. This is the paradox of meditation, of mindfulness meditation. The goal is not to, vector toward a certain state. The point, as the great meditation teacher Sharon Salzberg has said, the point of meditation is not to become a great meditator. The point of meditation is to become a better human, to be better at your life. And so the same is true on retreat, that I've done this a lot, where I'm berating myself for not being calm or not being as focused or whatever, and it's when that ends that interesting things can happen or not. But we do so much. The mind is so interfering that it creates a buffer between you, or whatever that is, and your direct experience. It's like just think about it with something small like eating. How as we eat, as we chew, we're hunting around for the next bite. We're never really experiencing what's happening right now. And on a retreat, that leaning forward can diminish to a significant extent, and it can be accompanied by a big blast of serotonin.
I want to let the audience ask some questions. Final question from me. You mentioned Mark Epstein, Sharon Salzberg. What other sort of intellectual influences do you have that you might recommend other people kind of check out? A lot of whom I'm sure you've come into contact with through your podcast.
Yeah. So I would say the folks who I wrote about a lot in 10% Happier, often they come out of like this school called the Jew-Boos. They're Jewish Buddhists. So they have these kind of chewy Jewish last names like Salzberg, Sharon Salzberg, Mark Epstein, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield. And these folks are all really New Yorkers who went over to India in the 60s and 70s and learned how to meditate, and then brought it back and started teaching it here. And without that work, we wouldn't. They really are the sine qua non, the conditions. They created the conditions that allowed this current health revolution, public health revolution, to arise. They've all written really interesting books, but I also recommend Sam Harris, who was trained by these folks, and some of you may know him because he has a very popular podcast called Waking Up. Waking Up is actually the name of a book he wrote called Waking Up, which is about meditation, which I highly recommend. And Sam is just also a really interesting dude, controversial, and I get some hate sometimes when I talk about how we're friends, but we are friends. And who else? Yeah, I'll leave it there. I don't want to overload you.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions? There's a mic right there.
Roman, my question is, how has the success of your podcasts, your apps, your books impacted your personal meditation practice? And like, do you feel a lot of pressure to be like really good because of that?
You know, I know enough now to know that that pressure is just a thought. However, in the writing of this most recent book, I really did, we went, I found this great meditation teacher named Jeff Warren, who's, I found him, that's a little presumptive on my part. We met, and I really developed a big man crush on him, and he's this awesome, rad guy from Toronto, and so I thought he would be the right person to put on a bus with me to go across country in 11 days, because he seemed like he kind of had the stamina and to do that, and being that close every minute of every day with a meditation teacher, he pointed out that I'm a huge hypocrite. He pointed out that I go around telling people that the goal of meditation is not to be really good at it. You know, as I've been saying, you've heard me say it a million times, it's just to get distracted, start again, get distracted, start again. But in my own practice, it started to become clear to Jeff that I was berating myself for my lack of focus. And he really helped me come up with some ways to not do it. And I'll tell you what the mechanism that's been really helpful to me, which is when you see that you've become distracted, to have this little mantra of welcome to the party. And like there's a lot of fake it till you make it involved here. But I found that now I've been doing it for a year and a half, that often I'll see, you know, he had me kind of name my like various inner neurotic programs. Like anger is a big one for me. My grandfather, Robert Johnson, who looks like one of the guy from American Gothic, he was this really tight ass, mean old goat who, he once took me and my brother into his living room, pointed out his new Betamax, this is back in the day, and said, if you touch this, I'll break your arm. We were 8. So that kind of guy, he's running through my veins. I have this tendency toward anger. I can be really crotchety and really mean to myself. And so he's like, when you see Robert Johnson, be like, what's up, Robert? Welcome to the party. And over time, I found that as goofy as that is, it's really changed my attitude toward myself. And and when I see anger just come up, with my wife or my child or whatever. So, yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Hello, thank you
Hi.
for being here.
Thanks.
10% Happier was amazing.
Thanks.
I think you should be less hard on yourself about the panic attack because it's not as bad as you describe it being. You mentioned having a kid. I think anxiety is something that people deal with for all of their lives, and then they come to meditation later in life. What advice do you have for like small children and getting them in a habit that helps them deal with anxiety early on?
Yeah, my kid's 3, not super mindful. Really good at pooping his pants. What did he say to me the other day? We were talking. Hey, we were playing basketball or something like that in the hallway, the little Nerf basketball, and he dropped it, and he's like, pick it up. And I said, what do I look like? And he said, a poopy. That's the kind of discussions we have. I have not, I actually want to write a book about mindful parenting, but I haven't started teaching him yet or doing much because I don't really know that much about how to teach a preschooler. And it can be done. Preschoolers can be taught meditation. There's different techniques for kids at different ages. I'd be perfectly comfortable teaching a high schooler because it's the same technique you teach a grown-up. But I don't really know all the stuff that you teach a kid, which makes me a horrible parent. But let me say this. I actually think, here's the story I'm telling myself, which is when I think back about my parents, I do 0% of the things they told me to do. Like they told me I couldn't watch TV. Now I work in the box. But I do everything they did. I do everything I saw them model. So I found meaningful work. I have a great relationship with my wife. I spend a lot of time with my child. I do all the things that I saw them do. I exercise a lot because my dad was running marathons, my mom was really into exercise, and all the things that just that they didn't lecture me about. And so I feel like lecturing your kid is a bad move, but modeling behavior for a kid is a better one. And the bad news for parents is if you want to have a mindful kid, you have to be a mindful parent. It's just, that is the sine qua non of the whole thing. But there's a great book out there, after I've now steadfastly refused to give you any practical advice. There's a great book called Mindful Games by Susan Kaiser Greenland and Annika Harris, who happens to be Sam Harris's wife, that actually does explain how to do this stuff.
Cool. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Hi, echoing everyone else, thank you for being here. So you said one of the, where the science is strongest is the impact that meditation can have on depression and anxiety. So where do you think that sort of falls in with things like therapy or medication? How do all of these things relate to each other? Have you tried those other routes, if that's not too personal a question? And how do you think they all relate to each other?
You can't get into my current line of work with anything being too personal. So, yes, tried all those routes, still believe in all of those routes. When it comes to mental well-being, I'm a maximalist. I think you should do everything, you should try everything that there's some science behind. Talk therapy, a lot of reason to believe it can be really useful. Medication, a lot of reason to believe it can be really useful. Why would you? What's the logic for not doing either? Now, we are as a society perhaps over-medicated, so I'm not saying you should willy-nilly be popping pills. But you know, if you have a careful, thoughtful doctor, I think it's something to look at. I don't see meditation as some silver bullet, or like I don't prejudice it over other modalities. I think it can work really well in conjunction with medication, talk therapy. For depression, most doctors will tell you exercise is incredibly important. Getting enough sleep, eating right, having meaningful work, having positive relationships. We know kind of the pantheon of no-brainers. And my only argument is that meditation should be in the pantheon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How's it going? So through personal experience and some anecdotes from friends, I found it hard to kind of like get over that hump in terms of locking down meditation as a long-term habit. I know you mentioned earlier in the talk, like once you start realizing successes from a habit, that's when it really gets easy to be repeated. But even like having seen some success, 20 days, 30 days, I always sort of fall off. Do you have any specific tips for turning it into a long-term habit?
Yeah, so this is I wrote a whole chapter about this because this is one of the big, there are many people in your situation where, so there are a lot of people who never try, but they just can't get it started. And then there are some people who try and just fall off really quickly. And then there are people who, like you, who they try it, they see the benefits, and they still fall off. The thing to know, well, there are a bunch of things to know. One is that we are not, I talked before about evolution and how it bequeathed us a racing mind. It also bequeathed us a mind that is shit at creating healthy habits. We evolved, as I discussed before, to like spot saber-toothed tigers and find where the food was. Evolution didn't care about your long-term health. It just cared about getting your DNA into the next generation. So we're not wired for brushing our teeth and things like that. We are wired as a consequence of evolution for really kind of short-term thinking. And so just knowing that lowers the temperature a little bit. You know you're wired to fail. This is hard to do. You are gonna fail time and time again. And so the answer is to approach the entire enterprise with a spirit of exploration and experimentation. And so try different times of day, try different apps, try different kinds of meditation, try different dosages. Like maybe really it'd be better for you to do 1 minute. Maybe 5 minutes is good. I try drafting off of existing habits. Maybe you have an abiding meditation habit, exercise habit. Well, right after you stretch, if you could put meditation right on there, it might be a good way to get it going. So two parts here. one, don't beat yourself up. It's totally normal. Two, try a bunch of stuff like those things that I just listed and see what happens. I think over time, given that you see the benefits and you have a history of making it work, it will click at some point. It will.
Thanks.
And the other thing to know is that like falling off the wagon and starting again, in that process, nothing has been lost. It's like not like you are rebuilding from zero. I don't think that's the case. It's just like when you get lost in meditation. The whole game is just to notice and to start again. And I think that analogy holds true for the habit formation process.
Thanks for coming. I'm a big fan. I really love all the potty talk, the potty mouth, because I'm so used to hearing you talk like on a podcast where it's clean and everything. And thanks for coming to.
Yeah, well, my podcast is owned by Disney.
And like you're at a company that you said our attention is under siege, and
Yeah.
by some companies like ours, and maybe you can help us figure out how to because the next step, it seems like artificial intelligence is like we're trying to program robots to think, but really what we need to be doing is teaching robots to be mindful. So maybe you could help us with that.
By the way, I made that
part of
joke
the
at
problem.
Apple too, so I'm not just picking on you guys. God, AI is such a tricky thing, and I know next to nothing about it. But I see there's plenty of reasons to be a techno-skeptic when it comes to AI or when it comes to just basically the inundation of data for all of us. But I just see this counter trend of mindfulness as being really powerful and being real. And so I don't know what I would advise folks who are programming AI, but in terms of how to, I would love to come and sit in on discussions about how to make that more mindful. I have nothing that's surfacing right now. But I would say that everybody doing the work and everybody just full stop would benefit from this practice because it is such a nice corrective to the tide of society that's just yanking us along.
I actually wanted to ask you another question. So you talked a lot about, I assume you've never meditated on cocaine, but I don't know if that's too personal.
Not too personal, never done it. I mean, if my doctor would allow me to, I would love it. But
I think that would be a big zoo, right? I mean, not that I ever pretended. But
no judgment here, man.
I'm just wondering what your there's like pleasure seeking, there's alcohol, nicotine. Like how's your relationship changed with other, medications, whether it be like self-medication. I've heard you talk about like mushrooms on your podcast, and Sam Harris has certainly talked about this stuff a lot. To be mindful, do you need to like just wipe your hands clean of this stuff, or
No.
what's your take on altering your mind?
A lot of things to say on that. First of all, on the mushroom, acid, ayahuasca, DMT tip, I'm really interested in Michael. Jesse and I were talking before. Michael Pollan has a new book out about this called How to Change Your Mind. And recently I struck up a little bit of a friendship with Tim Ferriss, who's really into this stuff, and Sam, not anymore, but Sam's done a lot of this and written about it. But my shrink and my wife make the case in a very compelling fashion that for somebody who has panic disorder, messing with my brain chemistry while I still have to go on television, probably not the best move. So while I'm very interested in this stuff, I'm not going to do it, at least not right now. But as to just the everyday quote unquote vices, drinking alcohol, smoking a little bit of weed, or whatever it is, I'm not really that judgmental about it. The Buddhist perspective is not that you should never have any pleasure in your life. It's, are you so swamped and addicted to the pleasure that it's actually really not pleasurable anymore? And that's the line to play with. So I know plenty of really, really well-trained meditation teachers who will have a glass of wine once in a while, or like chocolate or whatever. The point is not that you should become an ascetic. The point is that you should just be able to manage these pleasures skillfully. And actually, you can start to see over time that desire, pleasure, these are all impermanent things. And you can start to surf that in a more and get interested in it in a way that the meditation practice can help you with. And on the flip side, displeasure and pain are also impermanent. And you can, so the practice can be woven into all sorts of aspects of life. And I would argue that I have a friend who's a neuroscientist and a meditation teacher, and he was writing a book that he ended up calling something else, but he was going to call it We're All Addicted. Because we're all addicted. Addiction is part of our lives. We're just hurling ourselves from one hit of pleasant experience, one dopamine hit, to the next all the time. One latte, one slice of cake, one party, whatever. We're always on the hunt. And seeing that is the first step towards starting to kind of play with it in a more skillful way. It doesn't mean that you are never going to have any pleasurable stuff. I still, I went to a movie with my wife this morning. So Solo, which by the way, and I'm a Disney employee, so I'm supposed to say this, but it actually is really good. The new Han Solo movie. So I still, I still love all sorts of things that I love, but it's about hopefully managing addiction.
Thanks again for coming in. I'm new to the meditation practice, and everything I've read, including what you said here today, the practical application of meditating, it's always recommended to do it sitting instead of lying down. I think I also fall victim to trying to get the most out of something with the least amount of work, and I want to incorporate meditation in my day-to-day. And the easiest thing I can think of is doing it right when I wake up, lying down. Do you not recommend that? Is there science
totally
behind
fine.
having to do meditation while sitting?
Totally fine.
Okay.
So the Buddha talked about 4 ways to meditate, 4 postures for meditation: sitting, standing, walking, or lying down. So you're on the right side of the angels as per the Buddha. Not a bad place to be. So I think it's totally fine to lie down and meditate. Your mind's your mind, whatever posture you're in. So if you're training it, you're training it. Now, there are some schools of meditation, especially the Zen school, that are really strict about posture, and I think there's something to that. But as a guy who doesn't like to sit straight, can't sit cross-legged, I'm really on the side of the argument that's like what I said before, that you're training your mind whatever position your body's in, and that's really where I would put your attention.
Great, thank you.
My pleasure.
Hi, Dan. A few years ago, you and Sam Harris were at the Rubin and talked about mindfulness meditation, and I think this was around the time you had written 10% Happier.
Yeah.
And so Sam, I think jokingly had said, I don't want to denigrate your experience, but he talked about there being a little more to mindfulness and the practice, things like the ability to discover fundamental things about the mind, self-transcendental experiences, and you brought up how this is common across religious and non-religious people, and you even see it in athletes who get into a flow state.
Yeah.
And then he brought up this idea of the self and the ego and how through meditation you can kind of get rid of that illusion. So I was wondering if you could, what's your take on that? Have you moved away, or I guess researched more, discovered more than just the utilitarian aspects of meditation?
It's a great question. Sam and I just did an event together in LA the other day that's going to post on our respective podcasts soon. It's really a question of emphasis. So Sam is is very erudite and he's a public intellectual. That's the way he thinks of himself. And so I am not nearly as educated as Sam, and I'm a TV news anchor, right? So I'm really keeping things more basic, and I'm really trying to emphasize. I speak to folks today I'm at Google, but I'll be in Indiana or New Orleans or wherever. I'm really speaking to all kinds of people about this. Cops, social workers, celebrities, whatever. I want to be able to talk to everybody in language they can understand. And so I do, and Sam and I have talked about this publicly, I choose to emphasize certain aspects of the practice. Primarily two. One is focus, and the other is mindfulness, not being yanked around by your emotions. Of course, Sam is correct when he talks about what is sometimes referred to as the deeper end of the pool, which is that you start to examine the nature of the self, the nature of who you are, the nature of consciousness. All of that stuff is absolutely real and a huge part of my practice, and I'm always happy to talk about it because I think actually there's nothing more interesting. And we talk about it a lot on my podcast these days, but it's not what I lead with because my audience is very different from Sam's. It's like a bunch of really smart, uptight young men, right? Maybe not uptight, but like a lot of really smart guys who have opinions about things, and I just did this event with him in LA, and they all come, and they're great. They're super intense and really smart, but so Sam can lead with like the biggest, most esoteric idea because that's what his audience expects. But I'm not that smart, and I choose really to emphasize the low-hanging fruit, which is why Sam often says you should read 10% Happier before you read Waking Up. They work as a sequence in that way, because I really am happy splashing around in the shallow end, because I am, I'm not talking about my own personal practice here. I'm talking about my public positioning because I really I'm sort of at the wide end of the funnel. I want to talk about the basic human capacity to train the mind and get people in the pool. And then in my own personal practice, I do 2 hours a day of meditation. I do 10-day silent meditation retreats one-on-one with Joseph Goldstein, and all of this stuff is the stuff that I'm obsessed with. But it just doesn't seem to me the thing to lead with when I'm trying to get people just to do a minute or 5 minutes a day of meditation.
Appreciate your work. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Everybody check out Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. Check out 10% Happier, the podcast, the app. Is there anything else?
No, you've done a great job plugging. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. It was fun. Really fun.
That was awesome.